He said it casually, like it wasn't meant to hurt. Let the adults talk. You're too young to matter here. Everyone laughed because that's what people do when power decides who's allowed to speak. But what none of them knew was that the silence that followed was already working against them. Before I tell you how that moment ended, let me say this. If you've ever been dismissed, talked over, or treated like your voice didn't count, stay with me. And if stories like this matter to you, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what comes next. Some lessons don't come from arguing, they come from waiting. It happened during a family meeting that wasn't officially called a meeting, but everyone knew it was one. The kind where people gather around a table, not for food, but for decisions. Voices were confident, opinions were loud. Everyone seemed certain of their place in the room. Everyone except me. I sat near the edge, listening more than speaking. I'd learned early that being quiet made people careless. They assumed silence meant ignorance, that you weren't paying attention, that you didn't understand the stakes. My uncle sat at the center of it all, exactly where he liked to be. He had that presence, commanding without raising his voice. People deferred to him without realizing they were doing it. He spoke in conclusions, not questions, and when someone disagreed, he smiled like they'd missed something obvious. I'd tried to contribute earlier, not interrupting, not challenging, just offering a thought. That's when he said it. You're too young to matter. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the room, like he was explaining something everyone already agreed with, and the room followed his lead. No one defended me. No one even looked uncomfortable. They smiled, nodded, moved on. Comfort won over fairness in seconds. I didn't argue. I didn't shrink either. I just stayed quiet. Because what my uncle didn't realize was that I'd already been part of this conversation long before it started, just not in the way he imagined. The secret wasn't something I held in my hands. It wasn't paperwork or proof or leverage. It was knowledge, earned slowly by being present when others assumed I didn't belong. I knew who had been making decisions behind the scenes. I knew which voices were missing from the room and why. I knew which compromises had been made quietly and who benefited from them the most, including my uncle. The betrayal wasn't just that he dismissed me, it was that he did it knowing I'd been doing work no one else wanted to do. Listening, connecting dots, carrying context while others carried authority. That night, I watched the conversation continue without me. Plans were made, responsibilities assigned. Everyone seemed satisfied, except something didn't sit right, because every decision leaned heavily in one direction, his direction, and the more confident he sounded, the more obvious it became that no one was questioning whether his version of things was complete. I stayed silent through it all, not because I agreed, because I didn't need to interrupt something that was already revealing itself. Over the next few days, the meeting became the reference point for everything. People talked about what we decided, as if it were settled, as if there hadn't been any gaps, any blind spots. That's when I started hearing from others privately. Small comments, hesitations, people asking what I thought, quietly, away from him, not because they suddenly respected me, but because doubt had crept in, and doubt doesn't announce itself, it whispers. I answered honestly, carefully. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't frame anything as a problem. I just asked questions back. Did anyone explain why that choice was made? Who benefits most if this goes through? Did you notice who wasn't asked? Those questions lingered. My uncle noticed the shift before anyone admitted it. He always did. Control depends on awareness. He started checking in more, asking who'd spoken to whom, framing himself as concerned about unity. I stayed out of it. That was my revenge, though I didn't think of it that way yet. Revenge doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like refusing to smooth over the cracks someone else created. Another meeting was scheduled, this one more formal, more people invited. I was included again, though no one acknowledged the change. My uncle spoke first, as usual, confident, polished. He summarized decisions as if they were already facts. Then something unexpected happened. Someone asked a question he didn't have an immediate answer for. It wasn't confrontational, it wasn't aggressive, it was simple. Who approved that part? The room went quiet. My uncle smiled, but it was slower this time. He explained, redirected, moved on, but the silence didn't dissolve the way it used to. I felt eyes flick toward me, then away. They were starting to wonder why I'd been dismissed so quickly the first time. I said nothing. By the end of the meeting, an announcement was scheduled later that week, a formal one, the kind that made everything official. My uncle seemed satisfied, almost triumphant. He didn't know that announcement wasn't his to control, because the truth was, the people who actually mattered, the ones with final say, had been paying attention too, and unlike him, they didn't confuse age with awareness. I knew this because one of them had spoken to me earlier, quietly, without assumptions. They'd asked what I thought. And for the first time, I didn't answer with questions. I answered with clarity. That announcement wasn't about policy or plans. It was about accountability. And when it came, it would do something my uncle never expected. It wouldn't call him out. It would simply make room for voices he'd tried to erase, including mine. As the day of the announcement approached, the tension in the family grew. Conversations softened. People became cautious. My uncle noticed, but he misread it as anticipation. He thought he was about to be proven right. I knew better, because when someone says you're too young to matter, they reveal something important. They're afraid of what you'll say when you're finally heard, and once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. The room that had laughed that night was about to fall silent. Not because I demanded it, but because someone else decided to listen. And when that announcement was finally made, everything my uncle thought he controlled began to shift. But before that moment arrived, there was a stretch of days that felt heavier than the meeting itself. Silence has weight when people know something is coming but don't know what it will cost them. I could feel it in the way conversations slowed when I entered a room, then resumed carefully once I sat down. No one ignored me anymore. They just didn't know how to place me. My uncle, on the other hand, became more visible. He checked in constantly, asked if anyone had questions, reminded everyone how important alignment was. He framed it as leadership, but it felt like surveillance. He was trying to locate uncertainty before it could organize itself. I watched him closely, not with anger, but with curiosity. Power behaves differently when it senses erosion. It tightens, it repeats itself. It starts explaining things that were never questioned before. One evening, he pulled me aside, not abruptly, casually, like it was an afterthought. "You've been quiet lately," he said, smiling. "Everything okay?" It was the same smile he'd worn when he dismissed me, polite, controlling, expecting reassurance. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, but he didn't move away. You know, meetings can get complicated. Sometimes people misunderstand things. It helps when everyone stays on the same page. There it was, the warning disguised as concern. I agree, clarity matters. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to decide whether that was agreement or defiance. Then he laughed lightly and patted my shoulder. "You'll understand more as you get older." I didn't respond, because the truth was, I already understood more than he realized. I understood that he wasn't afraid of my age, he was afraid of my perspective, afraid that someone who wasn't invested in maintaining his authority might describe things exactly as they were. After that conversation, he kept his distance, not openly, just enough to avoid giving me more opportunities to speak privately with others. But it was too late. The questions were already circulating. I heard them indirectly. Why wasn't that discussed openly? Who decided that? I didn't realize there were other options. None of those questions mentioned my uncle by name. They didn't need to. Systems don't break when people attack them. They break when people start examining them. The day before the announcement, there was another informal gathering, smaller, fewer voices. My uncle wasn't there yet when I arrived. People spoke more freely in his absence, not critically, thoughtfully. Someone asked me what I thought would happen next. I think things will slow down, and that's not a bad thing. They nodded, no one left. That was new. When my uncle arrived, the tone shifted instantly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Conversations became guarded. People deferred again, but the reflex was weaker now, like a habit losing its grip. He noticed. He took the center of the room as usual and began talking about the announcement, about how it would put things to rest, about how it would confirm direction. I saw a few exchanged glances, not agreement, recognition. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was aware that whatever happened next would redefine my place in the family, whether I wanted it to or not. Being underestimated had protected me for a long time. It gave me space, freedom. Now that protection was fading, replaced by visibility, and visibility always comes with risk. The morning of the announcement arrived quietly. No buildup, no tension in the air that an outsider could detect. But inside the room, everything felt sharpened. My uncle sat confidently, arms crossed, posture relaxed. He greeted people warmly. He had no reason to doubt himself. From his perspective, the system still worked. The person making the announcement arrived last. They didn't take the center seat. They didn't raise their voice. They simply waited until everyone settled. Then they spoke. They started by acknowledging the family, the effort, the history. It was calm, balanced. No accusations, no surprises. Then they said something that changed the temperature instantly. We've realized that some voices haven't been included in these discussions. The room went still. My uncle smiled faintly, like he was expecting a clarification that would absolve him. The speaker continued. Not intentionally, but consistently. That word consistently hung in the air. They talked about perspective, about blind spots, about how decisions made without full context can feel efficient, but often cost more in the long run. No names were mentioned, no blame was assigned, but everyone knew exactly who the words were about. Then came the part that mattered. Going forward, they said, we're changing how decisions are made. No single voice will carry final authority. Input will be shared. Roles will be redefined. I felt the shift before I saw it, the subtle straightening of backs, the quiet intake of breath. My uncle's smile disappeared. The speaker wasn't finished. We're also recognizing contributions that have gone unacknowledged. They paused, and that includes listening, observation, pattern recognition, things that don't always look like leadership until you realize they've been holding everything together. That's when they looked at me. Not dramatically, not ceremoniously, just directly. I'd like him to be part of this process moving forward. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was complete. No one spoke, no one moved. Even my uncle stayed still, his expression unreadable. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt exposed. Not because I'd been elevated, but because the truth had surfaced without me having to force it. The speaker continued, outlining next steps, expectations, timelines. The room slowly began to breathe again. People nodded, some smiled, some looked thoughtful. My uncle said nothing. After the meeting ended, conversations restarted in fragments. People approached me cautiously, not congratulating, not apologizing, just acknowledging. My uncle left early. That was the first time he'd done that. In the days that followed, the dynamic shifted permanently. Decisions were slower, discussions were broader, disagreements happened openly, and my uncle, once central, now had to share space he'd never had to defend before. He didn't confront me. He didn't apologize either. Instead, he became quieter, more reserved, like someone learning a new language they didn't believe they'd ever need. I realized then that the revenge I'd stumbled into wasn't about embarrassing him, it was about removing the shield that let him speak without listening. He'd said I was too young to matter. What the announcement proved was something far more unsettling for him. I mattered because I'd been paying attention, and once attention is acknowledged, it can't be dismissed again, not honestly. The room had shut up, not because of my age or his authority, but because the truth had finally been given space. And space changes everything. Once the announcement settled in, nothing exploded the way people expect moments like that to. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, no emotional speeches. Instead, there was something much more unsettling for my uncle: adjustment.
People didn't turn against him, they didn't accuse him, they didn't whisper behind his back, they simply stopped orbiting him. That's a difficult thing to process when you spent years at the center of every conversation, when your opinions have always been treated like conclusions instead of starting points, when your confidence has been mistaken for clarity.
In the days that followed, I watched him carefully, not out of spite, but out of curiosity. I wanted to understand what happens when someone loses a kind of power they never realized they were borrowing from everyone else. At the next gathering, he arrived quieter than usual, not withdrawn, but cautious. He sat slightly off to the side instead of claiming the middle of the room. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he waited for a response instead of assuming one. It was subtle but noticeable. Others noticed it too. Someone interrupted him mid-sentence, not rudely, just naturally. Another person disagreed with him openly without apologizing first. He nodded along, but I could see the effort it took not to correct them immediately. This was new territory for him. For me, it was strangely familiar. I'd lived in that space my entire life. The space where you learn to measure your words, where you wait for openings instead of creating them, where you observe before you speak because you don't have the luxury of being heard automatically. Now, that space belonged to him too. The betrayal I'd felt that night, the one that had settled quietly instead of erupting, shifted into something more complex. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It had transformed into understanding, not forgiveness, understanding. I understood that my uncle hadn't dismissed me because he disliked me. He'd dismissed me because his authority depended on keeping certain voices small. Mine just happened to be convenient. That didn't excuse it, but it explained why the announcement shook him so deeply. Over the next few weeks, the new structure took shape. Meetings became more collaborative. People asked questions they'd never asked before. Ideas were debated instead of absorbed. It was slower, yes, but it was also more honest. I spoke more often, but not louder. I didn't assert myself aggressively. I didn't reference the past. I focused on the present, on clarity, on connecting threads others hadn't noticed. People listened, not because I demanded it, because the system now allowed it. My uncle struggled with this the most when decisions didn't go his way. In the past, he could redirect or delay until outcomes aligned with his preferences. Now, he had to accept conclusions shaped by multiple perspectives. I saw frustration flicker across his face more than once. I saw him inhale before speaking, then stop himself. That pause, that restraint, was something he'd never practiced before. One afternoon, he approached me privately. Not confrontational, not defensive, just tired. I didn't realize how much things depended on momentum, he said, almost to himself. Once it changes, you can't just push it back. I nodded. That's true, I said. He looked at me, then away. You've been thinking about this longer than I have. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. That mattered more. After that conversation, he stopped trying to assert himself the way he used to. He still contributed, but he asked more questions. He waited for responses. He listened, even when it was uncomfortable. Some people never adapt when systems change. He tried. That didn't erase the past, but it altered the future. As for me, I learned something important during that time. Being given a voice doesn't mean you have to use it constantly. It means you get to choose when it matters. I didn't speak to prove myself. I spoke to add value. That distinction kept me grounded. The family dynamic continued to evolve. Younger relatives spoke up more. Older ones admitted they'd overlooked things. There were moments of tension, yes, but also moments of honesty that had never existed before. One evening, someone joked about how things feel different lately. Everyone laughed, but this time, the laughter wasn't dismissive, it was reflective. My uncle laughed too, though his was softer, less performative, more real. I realized then that revenge doesn't always end in destruction. Sometimes it ends in recalibration, in forcing people to meet themselves in a mirror they'd been avoiding. He said I was too young to matter. What he'd learned was that age doesn't decide relevance. Attention does. Consistency does. And silence, when it's chosen, can be the most disruptive force in a room. The announcement hadn't shut everyone up because it elevated me. It shut everyone up because it exposed a truth no one had wanted to articulate, that authority without listening is fragile, and once that fragility is seen, it can never be unseen. By the time another month passed, the phrase, "too young to matter," had disappeared from conversations entirely, not because anyone banned it, but because it no longer fit the reality of the room. My uncle never said it again. He didn't need to. The silence that followed it the first time had already done the work. And as I watched the room operate without needing his approval, without needing anyone's approval, I understood the final piece of it all. The real revenge wasn't being heard, it was changing who decided what mattered. And that change, once made, doesn't announce itself loudly, it settles in, permanently. And that permanence was something my uncle was only just beginning to fully grasp. At first, he tried to treat it like a phase, a temporary adjustment people would eventually grow tired of. He told himself things would settle back into familiar patterns once the novelty wore off. That authority, once questioned, would naturally reassert itself. But time didn't agree with him. Weeks passed and nothing reverted. The room didn't drift back toward him. Decisions didn't quietly funnel through his approval. People didn't look to him first when something needed to be settled. They looked around, they asked, they waited. Waiting was the hardest part for him. I noticed how often he checked reactions now, how he paused mid-sentence to see if anyone would interrupt, how he softened statements into questions. These weren't flaws, they were skills he'd never had to learn before. Power had always filled the gaps for him. Now there were no gaps. One afternoon, during a discussion that would have once belonged entirely to him, someone disagreed openly with one of his points. Not sharply, not dismissively, just calmly. He started to respond, then stopped. He listened. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but it carried years of weight. When he finally spoke, his tone was different, less certain, more thoughtful. "I hadn't considered that angle," he said. The room didn't react dramatically. No gasps, no applause. They simply moved on. But I felt it. That sentence wasn't for them. It was for him. After that, something inside him loosened. Not completely, not easily, but enough to change how he showed up. He stopped trying to control outcomes and started contributing to them. Sometimes he still slipped into old habits, but now there was awareness behind his corrections, and awareness changes behavior in ways fear never can. As for me, my role settled into something steady. I wasn't elevated, I wasn't spotlighted, I was included, fully, equally. My ideas were challenged, questioned, refined, just like everyone else's, under the guise of experience. Once that excuse was gone, everything had to work harder to justify itself. The family dynamic became more honest. Not perfect, but honest. People admitted when they didn't know things. They asked for input instead of assuming authority. Even disagreements felt cleaner, less personal. And my uncle, one so certain of his position, had to rebuild his relevance the same way everyone else did, through contribution, not control. One evening, months after the announcement, he sat beside me quietly while others talked. There was no tension between us anymore, no edge, just shared space. "I said something once that I shouldn't have," he said suddenly. I waited. "I thought I was protecting order," he continued, "but I was really protecting comfort. Mine." I looked at him then, really looked. "That's easy to confuse," I said. He nodded. "I see that now." That was it. No apology, no defense, no justification, just recognition. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need for anything more. Because revenge, when it's done right, doesn't leave you hungry for validation, it leaves you clear. Clear about who you are, clear about what you won't carry anymore, clear about what you'll allow. The betrayal I'd felt that night didn't disappear, it transformed. It became a reference point instead of a wound, a reminder of how quickly people dismiss what they don't understand and how costly that dismissal can be. I learned that being underestimated can be a position of strength if you don't rush to escape it, that silence can be a strategy, not a surrender, that waiting doesn't mean doing nothing, it means letting patterns expose themselves fully. And I learned that revenge doesn't always announce itself with confrontation. Sometimes it arrives as structure, as process, as an announcement that quietly rewrites the rules of the room. My uncle said I was too young to matter. What he learned, slowly, uncomfortably, and in front of everyone, was that relevance isn't assigned by age or volume. It's earned by attention, by listening, by being willing to change. The room didn't fall silent because I spoke louder. It fell silent because the truth finally had space to land. And once that happens, no one laughs anymore. They listen because they understand what's at stake.